Hey everyone, my name is Jack. I'm a 23-year-old real estate investor and soon-to-be attorney, and on this channel I cover a variety of topics as they relate to real estate, investing, the markets, and pretty much everything as it has to do with personal finance. So if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. But today I want to talk about a recent report put out by Redfin, one of the large national home listing services. The report showed that median home sale prices are at all-time highs, with a median home currently selling for $322,000. Which is an all-time high and is up 15% from last year. I want to go through some of the finer details of this report since Redfin has a lot of good data that they put together in a few charts comparing it to the last couple of years, because I think it's important to understand the environment that you're investing in, or if you're a home buyer buying in, or even if you're a home seller looking to sell. Understanding what exactly is going on in the housing market is important since it helps you analyze what certain risks you might be facing are. I'm not a financial advisor and I'm not suggesting that you buy or sell right now, since every single deal is different and every single sub-market within the greater US market is different. You might have some markets that are vastly outperforming these metrics and others that are well underperforming it. The point is, do your own research. There are good deals out there in any market and there are bad deals out there in any market. So let's try to figure out what on earth is going on with home sale prices. Why are they rising? What else is going on behind the scenes? Well, the overarching theme of the 2020 housing market was very reduced supply. That is, there were far less active listings this year compared to previous years. People were not listing their homes nearly as much, so there was a lot less competition with largely the same pool of buyers as before. You had about as many people buying homes as I'll get into, but far less supply. And when you have largely the same number of people chasing a smaller portion of goods, those goods are going to become more pricey, and that is the case for housing here. Now, as to why people weren't selling their homes, that's a little hard to answer. We had a lot of fear at the end of the spring and into the early summer of 2020. A lot of people wanted to hang on to what they had and try to sort out their situation, weren't really sure what was going on. And of course, it was very awkward to try and schedule showings since often you had to do it virtually, or you had limits in the amount of people that could come there. And a lot of sellers were probably fearful that they wouldn't want to try to list right now since you couldn't properly market the property with all the fear in the air. So you saw that large dip in supply following the beginning of the pandemic in the US, and it has largely continued through the year. But what about the demand side? What's going on there? Well, a lot of people have suggested that 2020 saw a lot of pent-up demand, where you had a lot of people who wanted to buy homes but didn't actually end up buying it this year. Well, there's some data that suggests that that might not be quite the case. And the reason I say that is because if you look at this graph right here, you see that pending sales dropped pretty dramatically once the pandemic started rolling through. A lot of lenders tightened up temporarily. People were very uncertain as to what was going to happen. So you saw that dip in pending sales. But then once everything started opening up, we had all these government programs get thrown into the system that created a lot of liquidity, a lot of lending power for lenders, reduced rates, a lot of demand from that. All these different factors affecting demand especially, you suddenly see this uptick in pending sales. But remember, supply is actually still very low here, yet we still see a rising amount of pending sales. And whereas normally we see a sharp decrease into the fall and winter months, since often home buying takes place during the summer in the US, partly because of the school season. And then of course you have the winter in many states where people don't necessarily want to go shopping. You got the holidays as well during December and January that people aren't really looking to buy then, and typically a lot of the home buying is done in the summer. Not that there aren't transactions in the winter normally. But to me, this graph looks like a lot of the sales that were sort of forgotten or missed in the summer seem to have been made up through the fall and winter. And you have a lot more demand in the winter than you normally have, since there's so many more pending sales than there normally are in the winter. But again, supply has decreased. So you have more sales, or largely the same number of sales on the aggregate. If you look at the entire year, you have far less supply, and that's going to drive up prices. But there was also the factor increasing demand. So it wasn't just pent-up demand that was already there. You had more demand because of slashed rates. People could buy more home with the same amount of money because of decreased interest rates by the Fed, which then made mortgages much cheaper. So now we're at all-time interest rate lows, where you can often get a 30-year mortgage for less than 3% interest annually. That's going to have a positive effect on demand, and when demand goes up, you'd expect prices to go up with supply being the same. But here you actually have supply being less, so you have increased demand at least slightly and decreased supply, so you see this price rise throughout 2020. The other unusual thing with 2020 is how the winter months have been much stronger for home sales as opposed to the summer. Again, that was largely due to the pandemic timing and all of the uncertainty that came with that. It was very front-loaded in that way. Things have gotten more certain. Granted, it's still very uncertain in a lot of ways. We have vaccines rolling out, people are a little more optimistic, but you do have a lot of this being propped up by large government stimulus programs, which I'll get to in a second. But you can see by this graph that sales prices normally peak in the summer, at least in recent years, but 2020 saw it drop. And it's now peaking in the winter instead. So it's very awkward how this slope of the graph looks. It normally kind of peaks in the summer, then goes sideways or slightly downwards in the winter. You're not seeing that this year. So it's a very unusual one to try and compare to other years. So that's kind of a holistic look on the national housing market from 2020. We see that we have decreased supply and largely the same, if not increased demand. And of course, with that comes higher prices. But what's next? We know what happened, but what is going to happen? That's the question on everyone's mind. We want to know if there's going to be a crash. I recently did a video going over why I think a crash is more likely than not. Not necessarily certain. Nothing is certain. But what should we look out for moving into the future? Well, the big red flag is there's probably a lot of pent-up supply. And the reason I say it's pent up is since we haven't had a lot of supply come online because of foreclosure forbearances, eviction moratoriums, and other things that have propped up the real estate market in a very big way. You haven't had this normal supply coming online that normally happens when you have foreclosures and we have people who are selling because of debt problems. But here, a lot of the debt problems have basically been put on pause because of forbearance programs and things like that. A lot of jurisdictions aren't doing tax foreclosures, so it's not just debt. You have anything having to do with real estate foreclosures that has largely stopped. And that has the effect of reducing supply. And when you have reduced supply, you're going to expect higher prices. So if those forbearance programs and the foreclosure moratoriums end, I would expect a lot of supply to come online. I don't know how much it would be, and in many cases, a lot of people might be in a slightly better position than they were last year because of reduced rates, driving up demand, which would thus increase prices, even if that supply came back online. We shall see what happens. But I think the demand side also depends on government in big ways, especially when it comes to mortgage interest rates and then also mortgage programs that are federally subsidized. That is a big deal driving a lot of the housing market. I'm talking about Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. There's a lot of uncertainty right there, whether they're going to be reprivatized, and if that's the case, what would happen to their subsidies that keep mortgage interest rates so low? We're not saying that's going to happen necessarily, but it is a potential risk factor if you're looking at the housing market as a whole. But on the income side, you also have stimulus checks, unemployment boosts, which might not necessarily affect the housing market very much since you're usually talking about employed buyers who have pretty steady income history generally. Those are the people who can apply and actually get approved for mortgages. But that is a lot of extra money in the system. And when you have more money in the system, that money goes through the system and people have higher incomes because of it artificially. It's an inflationary effect. I don't know how much of that will be driving the housing market in the near future, but I think it will be some sort of factor. And of course, you never know what the Fed's going to do when they start buying up mortgage-backed securities, decreasing risk for lenders, and all the other things that they've been doing for a long time now. We'll see what they actually do in 2021 now that we've seen what chaos has kind of ensued in many of the markets in 2020. In any event, I'll be keeping an eye on this and keeping you informed as well, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss those updates, because I think it is very important, again, to pay attention to the market and the environment that you are investing in, because when you understand that, you'll have a better grasp on what risks you're actually facing, and then you can pay an appropriate price for whatever it is you're buying, or sell it for an appropriate price if you're on the sell side. But that's all I've got for today. If you like this video, please like it since it helps the channel out a lot. And if you like this sort of content about real estate, the markets, investing, and pretty much everything as it has to do with personal finance, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new updates since I put out new videos every single week, often about the real estate market. But if you're looking to get started in real estate and want to learn some of the fundamentals, definitely check out my book, The One Property Retirement, about a simple strategy for building your retirement nest egg using real estate. Again, it's great for beginners who maybe are unsure about how to get started with the real estate buying process, since it takes you from the very beginning of the deal, from running the numbers and vetting the deal, getting you to the closing table, and then beyond that with maintaining and renting out the property. If you end up reading the book, definitely leave a review on Amazon since that would help me out a lot. But until next time, take care.